I've always prided myself on noticing the little things. The way the coffee pot gurgles just before it's done brewing. The faint creak of the third stair from the top in our old colonial house. The way Sarah's laugh catches in her throat when she's nervous. 20 years of marriage will do that to you. Turn you into a catalog of your spouse's habits. But lately, something's been off, like a picture frame tilted just enough to catch your eye but not enough to demand fixing. I couldn't put my finger on it, and that's what gnawed at me most. Sarah's been my constant since we were 22, fresh out of college and fumbling through life together. She's the kind of woman who makes you feel steady. Blonde hair always pulled back in a loose bun, hazel eyes that crinkle when she smiles, a voice soft but sure. We built this life in Maplewood, a sleepy suburb where the biggest scandal is usually someone forgetting to mow their lawn. 2 kids, Ellie, 16, and Ben, 12. Both good kids, though Ellie's at that age where she'd rather text her friends than talk to me. It's a good life. Stable. Predictable. At least it was. The first hint came 3 months ago, though I didn't see it for what it was. Sarah started spending more time in the garage. She'd always been crafty. Sewing little costumes for the kids' school plays, knitting scarves for Christmas gifts. But this was different. She'd vanish out there after dinner, claiming she was working on a project. I'd hear the hum of her sewing machine, the occasional clatter of tools, and once, a strange, rhythmic tapping I couldn't place. When I asked, she'd wave me off with a smile. Just something silly, Tom. You'll see it when it's done. I didn't push. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? But the hours stretched. She'd come back inside after midnight, her hands stained with paint or sawdust, her eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't exhaustion, it was excitement. I'd lie awake, listening to her shuffle into the bathroom to wash up, wondering what could keep her so absorbed. I told myself it was harmless. A hobby. Maybe she was making something for our anniversary coming up in July. I even felt a flicker of pride. She was creating again, finding herself in a way I hadn't since the kids were little. But that flicker dimmed when I noticed she'd started locking the garage door behind her. One night I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, the kids long in bed, and Sarah was out there again. I padded downstairs in my socks, the hardwood cold against my feet, and stood by the kitchen window overlooking the driveway. The garage light glowed through the small frosted pane in the door, a soft yellow halo in the dark. I don't know why I did it, call it instinct, but I grabbed my coat, slipped outside, and crept closer. I pressed my ear to the door. No sewing machine, no tapping, just her voice, low and melodic, like she was telling a story. And then a man's laugh, deep, familiar. My stomach twisted. I knew that laugh. It was Mike's. Mike's been my best friend since high school. We grew up 2 streets apart. Him the loudmouth who'd talk me into sneaking beers from his dad's garage. Me the quiet one who'd make sure we didn't get caught. He was there when I met Sarah at a college bonfire, grinning like an idiot when I told him I was going to marry her someday. He stood beside me at the altar, handed me the ring with a wink and a whispered, "Don't screw this up, Tommy. He's Ellie and Ben's godfather, for heaven's sake. If there's one person in this world I trust with my life, it's Mike." So when I heard his laugh through that garage door, my first thought wasn't betrayal. It was confusion. Why was he here at nearly 1 in the morning with Sarah? I told myself it was innocent. Maybe he'd stopped by unannounced. Mike's impulsive like that. Maybe she'd called him over to help with her project, whatever it was. He's handy with tools. I'm not. It made sense. But the knot in my gut wouldn't loosen. I didn't knock. Couldn't. If I was wrong, I'd look like a paranoid fool. If I was right, I didn't know what I'd do. So I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water I didn't drink, and waited. 20 minutes later, I heard the garage door roll up, the crunch of gravel under tires. I peered through the blinds and saw Mike's black pickup pulling out of our driveway, the taillights winking red as he turned onto the street. Sarah came in a minute later, her cheeks flushed, her bun messier than usual. She froze when she saw me. "Tom, what are you doing up?" Her voice was too bright, like she was forcing it. "Couldn't sleep," I said, keeping my tone even. "Thought I heard something outside." She hesitated, just a heartbeat, but I caught it. "Oh, probably just the wind. It's getting chilly out there." She kissed my forehead, quick and light, and headed upstairs. I stayed at the table, staring at the water glass, replaying that laugh in my head. The next day, I asked Mike over lunch at the diner how his night was. He shrugged, said he'd been home watching a game. His eyes didn't meet mine. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention. Sarah's project nights grew more frequent, 3, sometimes 4 times a week. She'd take her phone with her, something she never used to do. I'd catch her smiling at it in the kitchen, typing quick messages before shoving it in her pocket when I walked in. Mike stopped coming over as much, always with an excuse: work, his mom's health, a last-minute trip. But I'd see his truck parked at the gas station near our house late at night, or cruising past our street when he had no reason to be there. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself I was imagining things, that 20 years of marriage couldn't unravel over something I couldn't even name. Then I found the key. It was tucked in the pocket of Sarah's coat, a small brass thing with a jagged edge, not like any key we owned. I tested it on the garage door one afternoon while she was at the grocery store. Fit perfectly. I stood there, heart pounding, knowing I could go in and see whatever she was hiding. But I didn't. Not yet. I put the key back, locked the door, and waited. I needed proof, not just of what she was doing, but of how far she'd gone. I've never been a sneaky guy. I'm the type who pays bills on time, mows the lawn every Saturday, calls my mother every Sunday. But suspicion changes you. It creeps into your bones, makes you someone you don't recognize. By mid-June, I was that someone. I started tracking Sarah's patterns: when she left for the garage, how long she stayed, what she carried out there. She'd take a canvas tote bag, the one she used to haul library books for the kids, stuffed with something bulky but light. I'd hear her humming as she crossed the driveway, a tune I didn't know. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The kids were at sleepovers, Ellie at a friend's, Ben at a scout campout, and Sarah had disappeared into the garage right after dinner, tote bag in hand. I waited 10 minutes, then grabbed a flashlight and the key from her coat. The air was thick with summer humidity as I crossed the driveway, my pulse loud in my ears. I turned the key in the lock, eased the door open, and slipped inside. The garage smelled of sawdust and paint, a sharp tang that stung my nose. Her workbench was cluttered, jars of brushes, scraps of fabric, a hot glue gun still plugged in. But what stopped me cold was the corner she'd curtained off with an old bedsheet. Light flickered behind it, shadows moving in a way that didn't make sense. I stepped closer, quiet as I could, and pulled the sheet aside. There they were, marionettes, dozens of them, strung up on a makeshift stage, their wooden limbs dangling from thin wires. Some were crude, others eerily detailed, painted faces with glass eyes, tiny clothes stitched with care. And there, in the middle, were 2 I recognized. One with my brown hair and flannel shirt, the other with Sarah's blonde bun and her favorite green dress. A third puppet, taller, had Mike's broad shoulders and black leather jacket. My throat went dry. A notebook lay open on a stool nearby, Sarah's neat handwriting filling the pages. I flipped through it, sketches of the puppets, notes on their movements, and then a script. Dialogue, stage directions, a story. My hands shook as I read. It wasn't just a play. It was a scene of Sarah and Mike, the puppets acting out moments I couldn't unsee. Tender whispers, secret meetings, a twisted intimacy played out in wood and string. She'd turned her betrayal into art, a private theater for her and Mike to revel in. I heard the back door of the house creak open, Sarah coming back. I dropped the notebook, ducked out of the garage, and locked it behind me. By the time she found me in the living room, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to read the paper. She smiled, oblivious, and said she was tired, heading to bed. I nodded, said I'd be up soon. But I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling. The image of those puppets burned into my mind. She'd made a fool of me, not just with Mike, but with this sick, creative mockery. And that's when I knew she'd pay for it. Not with tears or shouting matches, but with something colder, sharper, something she'd never see coming. The morning after I found the puppets, I woke up to Sarah humming in the kitchen, flipping pancakes like nothing had changed. The smell of batter and syrup filled the air, a cruel imitation of normalcy. I sat at the table, watching her move, graceful, carefree, her hair catching the sunlight through the window. She slid a plate in front of me, kissed my cheek, and asked if I'd slept okay. I nodded, my voice stuck somewhere deep in my chest. How could she stand there, acting like the woman I'd loved for 2 decades, when I'd seen the truth carved into those wooden figures? Couldn't eat. The pancakes sat there, growing cold, while my mind churned. Every detail from the garage replayed itself. The careful stitches on Mike's puppet jacket, the way Sarah's wooden twin had her head tilted just so, the script that turned their secret into a performance. It wasn't just the act of her being with him. It was the relish she took in it, the way she'd spun it into something elaborate and strange. She'd made me a prop in her little show, a clueless husband strung up for her amusement. That stung worse than anything. I went through the day like a ghost. Work was a blur, numbers on spreadsheets, phone calls I barely heard. My cubicle felt smaller, the walls pressing in, and all I could think about was how to confront her. But confrontation wasn't enough. Shouting, begging, even leaving her. It wouldn't touch what she'd done. She'd mocked me, reduced me to a caricature, and I needed something that hit her where it hurt. Something that turned her own game against her. That night, she went back to the garage, tote bag swinging from her shoulder. I waited until the door clicked shut, then slipped upstairs to our bedroom. I don't know what I was looking for. Proof, maybe, or a clue to how long this had been going on. Her nightstand drawer was the usual mess. Lip balm, a dog-eared novel, a bottle of aspirin. But under it all, I found a stack of photos, Polaroids, the kind she used to take of the kids when they were little. These weren't of Ellie or Ben, though. They were of the puppets, posed in scenes from her script, some with Mike's truck in the background, others lit by candlelight in the garage. One showed her hand adjusting my puppet strings, her wedding ring glinting in the flash. I stared at it until my vision blurred, the betrayal sinking deeper. I put everything back, careful not to disturb her chaos, and sat on the edge of the bed. The house was quiet except for the distant hum from the garage. That's when the idea started forming. Not a full plan, not yet, but a spark. She loved her puppets, her little world of control. I'd take it from her. I'd make her watch it unravel, piece by piece, until she understood what she'd broken. But I needed time, and I needed Mike. Mike's always been easy to read. He wears his thoughts on his face. Laughter when he's happy, a furrowed brow when he's stressed. So when I called him the next day and asked to meet at O'Malley's, our old haunt, I knew I'd see the truth before he even opened his mouth. He showed up 10 minutes late, his jacket rumpled, hair still damp from a shower. He slid into the booth across from me, grinning like we were back in high school, but his eyes darted to the door every few seconds. "Good to see you, Tommy," he said, clapping my shoulder. "Been too long." "Yeah," I said, sipping my beer. "Work's been nuts." "You?" "Same. You know how it is." He flagged the waitress, ordered a whiskey, neat. His hands fidgeted with the coaster, tearing little strips off the edge. I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. He didn't ask about Sarah. He didn't mention stopping by. He just rambled about a job he'd finished, some deck he'd built for a guy across town. I nodded, waiting. Finally, I leaned forward. "You ever think about how things change, Mike? How people aren't who you thought they were?" His grin faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just something I've been chewing on." I kept my voice calm, my face blank. Like how you figure someone's got your back, and then you find out they've been playing a different game. He laughed, but it was thin, nervous. "You're getting philosophical on me. What's up, man? Everything okay at home?" "Perfect," I lied. "Sarah's been busy with some project. Keeps her out late. You know how she gets when she's into something." His jaw tightened, just for a second. "Yeah, she's always been creative. Good for her." I wanted to lunge across the table, grab him by the collar, demand why he'd been in my garage, why he'd let her turn us into this. But I didn't. I needed him close, not spooked. So I smiled, toasted his glass with mine, and said, "You should come over soon. Been a while since we all hung out." "Sure," he said, too quick. "I'll text you." He downed his whiskey and made an excuse about a late shift. I watched him leave, the bar's neon sign casting red streaks across his truck as he peeled out. He was in it, no question. And he was scared. Back home, I started planning in earnest. Sarah's puppets were her pride. She'd poured herself into them, made them the centerpiece of her betrayal. I'd used them. I'd twist them into something she couldn't escape. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone who knew her as well as I did. Someone she trusted. Not Mike, he was too deep in her web. It hit me then, Ellie. Our daughter. She'd inherited Sarah's knack for crafts, her sharp eye for detail. And she'd never forgive her mother if she knew. I hated dragging her into this, but Sarah had left me no choice. Ellie's room is a teenager's fortress. Posters of bands I don't know, clothes strewn across the floor, a desk buried under sketchbooks and colored pencils. She was sprawled on her bed when I knocked, earbuds in, scrolling her phone. She yanked one out when she saw me, sitting up with that half-curious, half-annoyed look she's perfected lately. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" I sat on the edge of her desk chair, picking my words careful as glass. "You and Mom still talk about her projects much?" She shrugged. "Not really. She's been weird about it lately. Locks herself in the garage like it's some big secret." "Why? She ever show you what she's working on?" "Nope. I asked once, but she said it wasn't ready. Kinda hurt my feelings, honestly. She used to let me help with stuff." Ellie frowned, twirling the earbud cord around her finger. "You've seen it, right? What's she making?" I hesitated. This was the line. Once I crossed it, there was no going back. But Sarah had crossed hers first. "Yeah, I've seen it. It's different. Puppets. Like marionettes with strings. She's got a whole setup out there." Ellie's eyes lit up. "No way. That's so cool. Why's she hiding it?" "It's not just the puppets," I said, my voice steady despite the rage simmering underneath. "It's what they're for. She's telling a story with them. About her and Uncle Mike." Her face shifted, confusion, then a slow dawning. "What do you mean, her and Uncle Mike?" "They're closer than they should be. And she's using those puppets to play it out. Like a show." She stared at me, processing. "You're saying Mom's Dad? Are you serious?" "I wish I wasn't." I pulled out my phone, showed her a photo I'd snapped of the notebook before I'd left the garage. The script page with Sarah's handwriting, unmistakable. Ellie read it, her expression hardening with every line. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. "She's a liar," she whispered. "How could she do that to you? To us?" "I don't know," I said, "but I'm not letting it stand. I need your help, Elle. She trusts you. She'll let you in where she won't let me." "What do you want me to do?" Her voice was steel now, the hurt turning to something fiercer. "Get into the garage. Learn her routine, her tools, everything she's got going. Then we'll take it apart. Her puppets, her story, all of it. We'll make her see what she's done." Ellie nodded, slow and deliberate. "Okay, I'm in." That night, I lay awake again, the house creaking around me. Sarah was in the garage, oblivious, pulling her strings. But now I had my own Ellie, my daughter, my weapon. The revenge was taking shape, sharp and cold as a blade. Sarah thought she controlled the stage. She was wrong. The curtain was about to rise on a show she'd never forget. Ellie didn't waste time. The next afternoon, while Sarah was out picking Ben up from soccer practice, she slipped into the garage with the key I'd given her. I stayed in the house, pretending to mow the lawn, the roar of the engine masking any noise she might make. My hands gripped the mower's handle tighter than necessary, my mind racing with what she'd find. I trusted her. She's smart, resourceful. But part of me hated that I'd pulled her into this mess. She's 16, still a kid in so many ways, and here I was turning her into my accomplice. But Sarah had forced my hand. Ellie came back an hour later, her face pale but her eyes blazing. She dropped a small sketchbook on the kitchen table. Sarah's, filled with more drawings of the puppets, More scenes I didn't want to imagine. "It's worse than you said," she muttered, sitting across from me. "She's got a whole stage rigged up, lights, curtains, even a little sound system. There's a box of cassette tapes labeled performances. I didn't listen, but I bet I know who's on them." I flipped through the sketchbook, my stomach turning at the detail. Every puppet's gesture, every prop, mapped out like a director's playbook. Did she suspect anything? Nope. I locked it back up, left everything how it was. "But Dad, there's something else." Ellie hesitated, biting her lip. "She's got a calendar pinned up. Dates circled, nights when you're at your late meetings or when I'm at band practice. And there's one tomorrow night, marked with an M. Of course. Tomorrow was my monthly budget review at the office, always runs past 9. Sarah knew that. She'd planned around me like I was a piece in her game. "Good work, Elle," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "You up for more?" She nodded, fierce. "What's the plan?" "We don't touch her yet. We watch. Tomorrow night you're going in again, record what you can. I'll be late at work, but I'll circle back. We need evidence, something she can't deny. Then we start pulling it apart." Ellie agreed, and we spent the rest of the day acting normal, her blasting music in her room, me fixing a leaky faucet in the bathroom. Sarah came home with Ben, all smiles, chattering about his game. I smiled back, nodded at the right times, but every word she said felt like a splinter under my skin. That night, she kissed me goodnight, her lips soft against mine, and I wondered how she could lie so easily. I didn't sleep. I lay there, plotting, the hum of the garage in my memory like a taunt. The next evening, I left for work as usual, briefcase in hand, waving to Sarah as she waved back from the porch. Ellie texted me 10 minutes later. Asterisk, she's in the garage. Mike's truck just pulled up. Asterisk, I drove halfway to the office, then doubled back, parking 2 streets over in a cul-de-sac where no one would notice. I walked home through the dusk, sticking to the shadows, my pulse a steady drumbeat. Ellie met me at the back door, her phone clutched tight. "I've got the recorder on," she whispered. "It's hidden under the workbench. She won't see it." We waited in the kitchen, lights off, the house silent around us. I could hear faint murmurs from the garage, Sarah's voice, then Mike's, punctuated by that laugh I used to love. Took everything in me not to storm out there. But this wasn't the moment. Not yet. Ellie retrieved the recorder the next morning while Sarah was in the shower. We sat in my truck, parked at the edge of our street, and listened. The audio was muffled at first. Rustling, the clink of tools. But then Sarah's voice came through, clear and bright. "You ready for tonight's show?" she asked, a playful lilt I hadn't heard in years. Mike's reply was low, warm. "Always. You outdid yourself with these." There was a creak, a shuffle, and then the sound of strings being tugged, puppets moving, I realized. Sarah narrated, her tone shifting to something theatrical. The wife waits, patient as ever, while her knight slips through the shadows. It went on like that, a twisted fairy tale of her and Mike, their voices weaving in and out, laughing, murmuring things I couldn't bear to hear. At one point, Mike said, "Tom's got no clue, does he?" And Sarah laughed, a sharp, careless sound. "He's too busy playing the good husband." Ellie shut it off, her hands trembling. "I hate her," she said, barely above a whisper. "How could she say that about you?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. The recording burned in my grip, a weapon I'd use when the time was right. "We've got what we need," I said finally. "Now we hit her where it hurts." The plan crystallized over the next few days. Sarah's puppets were her obsession, her sanctuary. I'd take them, piece by piece, and turn them into a mirror she couldn't look away from. Ellie suggested swapping out parts of the stage, rigging it to fall apart during one of her shows. I liked that, but I wanted more. I wanted her exposed, humiliated, the way she'd made me feel. So we added a twist, we'd film it. Not just the collapse, but her reaction, her precious world crumbling. And we'd make sure Mike saw it too. Ellie went back to the garage under the guise of borrowing paint for a school project. Sarah let her in, unsuspecting, chatting about art while Ellie memorized the setup. The pulleys, the lights, the fragile wooden frame holding it all together. She reported back with a grin. It's rickety as heck. A good tug, and the whole thing's toast. Meanwhile, I worked on Mike. I invited him over for a beer that weekend, casual as ever, and watched him squirm through small talk. Sarah's been busy, I said, gauging him. Some big project. You seen it? He coughed, nearly choked on his drink. No, not really. She's always been into that stuff. Right? Right? I said, smiling. You should swing by soon. She'd love to show it off. He mumbled something about being busy, but I saw the sweat bead on his forehead. He was cracking. Good. That night, I dreamt of puppets. Faceless, dangling, their strings snapping one by one. I woke up sweating, Sarah asleep beside me, peaceful as ever. She had no idea what was coming. Friday night was the perfect chance. Sarah announced she'd be working late in the garage code. I now knew, for Mike's visits. I told her I'd be at the office again, and Ellie said she was sleeping over at a friend's. Neither was true. We set up in the attic, where a small window overlooked the garage's roof. Ellie had her phone ready, zoomed in on the side door, while I held a pair of binoculars I'd dug out of the camping gear. We'd sabotaged the stage the day before. Ellie had loosened the bolts on the frame, swapped a few strings with weaker thread, all subtle enough to pass a glance. At 8:47, Mike's truck rolled in, quiet as he could manage. He slipped into the garage, and soon the light flickered on behind the frosted pane. Ellie started recording, her breath shallow beside me. This is it, she whispered. I nodded, my jaw tight. We waited. 20 minutes in, we heard it. A crash, loud enough to rattle the window. Sarah's voice rose, sharp with panic. No, 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 what happened? Mike's followed, flustered. I didn't touch it. Then silence, broken by the groan of wood giving way. The stage was collapsing just as we'd planned. Ellie zoomed in as the door flew open. Sarah stumbled out, her hair wild, clutching a broken puppet arm. Mike was behind her, cursing, trying to drag the frame upright. It was chaos, and it was beautiful. We didn't stop there. Ellie had rigged a second surprise. A tiny speaker hidden under the workbench, set to play the recording we'd made. As Sarah bent to pick up the pieces, her own voice echoed out. He's too busy playing the good husband. She froze, her face draining of color. Mike spun around, looking for the source, but it was too late. The words looped, taunting, undeniable. Sarah's puppet world was falling apart, and now she knew someone had seen it. I watched through the binoculars as she sank to her knees, hands over her ears, Mike hovering uselessly above her. Ellie stopped recording, her eyes gleaming. She's done, she said, fierce satisfaction in her voice. What's next? Next, I said. We show her it's not over. We make her live it. The collapse was just the beginning. Sarah thought she'd controlled the story. She was wrong. I was rewriting it, and the ending would be hers to choke on. The morning after the stage collapsed, Sarah was a wreck. She shuffled into the kitchen, eyes red-rimmed, her usual bun a tangled mess. She didn't look at me, didn't even try to fake her normal cheer. Rough night? I asked, pouring coffee like it was any other day. She flinched, muttered something about a headache, and disappeared upstairs. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence settle. She had no idea I'd seen her crumble, no idea the speaker was ours. But she knew something was wrong, and that was enough for now. Ellie and I met in the garage while Sarah was out later that day. She'd mumbled about needing groceries, probably an excuse to escape the house. The wreckage was still there. Splintered wood, tangled strings, puppets sprawled like broken dolls. The speaker sat under the workbench, silent now, its job done. Ellie kicked a piece of the frame, her lip curling. She hasn't even tried to fix it. She's scared. Good, I said. Let her stew. We're not done yet. I picked up the puppet of me. Brown hair matted, flannel shirt torn, and turned it over in my hands. Sarah had crafted it with care, every detail a mockery. I'd used that care against her. Take these, I told Ellie, nodding at the puppets of Sarah and Mike. Hide them in your room. We'll need them later. She stuffed them into her backpack, then paused. What about the recordings? The video? We save them. They're our ace. But first, we make her doubt herself more. I've been thinking about it all night. How to twist the knife without showing my hand. Sarah thrived on control, on her little world of strings and secrets. I'd take that away, bit by bit, until she couldn't trust her own eyes. That evening, I started small. When Sarah came back from the store, I left the garage door unlocked. Just a crack, enough to unsettle her. She noticed right away, freezing in the driveway with her bags. Tom, did you go in there? She called, her voice tight. Nope, I said, chopping carrots for dinner. Why? It's open. She set the bags down, darted out to check, and came back pale. I must have forgotten to lock it. Weird. Happens to the best of us, I said, smiling. She didn't smile back. Later, while she was in the shower, I moved her tote bag from the hall to the living room couch. When she found it, she stared at it like it was alive, then shoved it into a closet without a word. Ellie caught my eye across the room and smirked. Sarah was unraveling, and we'd barely begun. By bedtime, she was jumpy, checking locks twice, peering out windows. I lay beside her, pretending to sleep, listening to her uneven breathing. She thought she'd lost control of her sanctuary. She had no idea how right she was. The next step was riskier, but it had to be done. Sarah's puppets weren't just her private obsession. She'd bragged about her art to friends, hinted at showing it off someday. I decided that day would come sooner than she planned. The neighborhood had a monthly craft fair at the community center. Nothing fancy, just tables of quilts and pottery, a chance for people to sell their hobbies. Sarah had gone every year, usually with knitted scarves or little ornaments. This time, she'd have something else to display. Ellie and I worked fast. She'd kept the Sarah and Mike puppets, along with a few others from the wreckage, enough to piece together a scene. We rigged them onto a makeshift stand I built from scrap wood in the basement, simple but sturdy. The Sarah puppet wore her green dress. The Mike one his leather jacket, posed close together, strings dangling like a frozen dance. Ellie added a sign in her neat handwriting. Asterisk, a love story in strings, Sarah's latest work. Asterisk, it was perfect. Vague enough to draw curiosity, pointed enough to sting. Saturday morning, I told Sarah I was running errands and took the truck. Ellie came with me, the puppet display hidden under a tarp in the bed. The fair was already bustling when we got there. Tables lined up under fluorescent lights, chatter filling the air. I knew people, Mrs. Carter from down the street, Dave who coached Ben's team. They'd all see this. I paid the $5 fee for a spot, set up the display near the entrance, and left before anyone could ask questions. Ellie texted a friend from band to spread the word. Check out Mrs. Larson's table. It's wild. We drove home and waited. Sarah was in the kitchen, oblivious, stirring soup on the stove. At noon, her phone buzzed. Once, then again, then a flood of texts. She frowned, swiped it open, and went still. What the? She muttered, scrolling fast. I peeked over her shoulder, playing dumb. Messages from neighbors. Sarah, this is amazing. Didn't know you were into puppets? Who's the guy supposed to be? One had a photo. Our display, front and center, people crowding around. Tom, did you see this? Her voice was shrill, panicked. Someone's got my puppets at the fair. No kidding, I said, feigning surprise. How'd that happen? I don't know. She grabbed her keys, coat half on, and bolted out the door. Ellie and I exchanged a look. Phase 2 was in motion. She came back 2 hours later, face ashen, clutching the sign Ellie had made. It was there, she said, dropping it on the table. Right when I walked in, everyone was staring, whispering. I grabbed what I could and left. But, Tom, who did this? Kids, maybe? I shrugged. Someone messing around? It's not funny, she snapped, then softened, rubbing her temples. I don't understand. I didn't answer. She spent the rest of the day pacing, jumping at every notification on her phone. Word was spreading, her secret, her art, out for all to see. And Mike, he'd hear about it soon enough. The net was closing. Mike called that night, his voice tight through the speakerphone Sarah had accidentally left on. I was in the living room, flipping channels close enough to hear. "What's this about puppets at the fair?" he asked, no trace of his usual swagger. "People are texting me, saying it's us, me and you." "What's going on, Sarah?" "I don't know," she hissed, pacing the kitchen. "Someone took them, put them out there. I'm freaking out, Mike." "Did Tom?" "No, he wouldn't. He doesn't even know about us." A pause. Heavy. "Right? He'd have said something," Mike muttered. "But this is bad. If he finds out." "He won't," she cut in, desperate. "I'll fix it. Just don't come by for a while, okay? Lay low." "Yeah, fine." He hung up, abrupt. Sarah sank into a chair, head in her hands. I turned the TV up, pretending I hadn't heard. She was rattled, and Mike was pulling away. Perfect. Sunday morning, I took it further. I kept one puppet, the one of me, from the garage hall. It was battered now, paint chipped, but still recognizable. I drove to Mike's place, a small ranch house 10 minutes away, and left it on his porch with a note. Asterisk. She's not the only one who can play. Asterisk, no signature. Just enough to make him sweat. I watched from across the street as he stepped out an hour later, coffee in hand, and stopped dead. He picked it up, read the note, and dropped it like it burned. His head whipped around, scanning the street, but I was already gone. Back home, Sarah was a ghost. Quiet, distracted, picking at her breakfast. Ellie nudged me under the table, her eyes asking if it had worked. I nodded slightly. By afternoon, Mike texted her. I saw it when she left her phone on the counter. Asterisk, we need to talk. Not here. Meet me at the park, 3. Asterisk, she slipped out without a word to me, claiming she needed air. Ellie and I followed, parking far enough away to stay unseen. Through the binoculars, I watched them by the picnic tables. Mike pacing, Sarah gesturing wildly. "This is too close," he was saying, loud enough to carry. "That puppet on my porch. Someone knows, Sarah. I'm out." "You can't just," she started. But he cut her off. "I can. I'm not losing everything for this." He walked away, leaving her standing there, alone. She didn't cry, just stared after him, hands clenched. Ellie whispered, "She's breaking." "Not yet," I said. "But she will." Mike was gone, her stage was ruined, her neighbors were talking. All she had left was the lie she'd built around me. I'd strip that away next, and when I did, she'd have nothing left to hold on to. Sarah came home from the park looking like she'd aged 10 years. Shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. She didn't speak, just dropped her keys on the counter and disappeared into the bedroom. I let her go, let the silence fester. Ellie was upstairs, editing the video from the garage collapse, sharpening the audio, zooming in on Sarah's panicked face. "It's ready," she texted me later that night. "What now?" "Tomorrow," I texted back. "We end it." The plan was fully formed now, a machine I'd built piece by piece. Sarah thought she'd hit bottom with Mike walking away, her puppets exposed. She was wrong. The real fall was coming, and I'd make sure she felt every inch of it. Sunday morning, I acted like nothing was wrong. Made coffee, flipped through the paper, asked Ben how his scout trip went. Sarah stayed in bed, claiming a migraine. Ellie played her part too, chattering about band practice, keeping the house loud and normal. But under it all, the tension coiled tighter. At noon, I told Sarah I was heading to the hardware store, needed paint for the shed. She barely nodded, still buried under the covers. Perfect. Ellie and I didn't go to the hardware store. We drove to the community center instead, where the craft fair folks stored extra tables in a back room. I'd borrowed a key from Dave the week before, claiming I'd help set up next month. The room was dim, cluttered with folding chairs and old banners, but there was a projector in the corner, a relic from movie nights the center used to host. Ellie hooked her phone to it, tested the video. Sarah's voice crackled through the speakers, sharp and damning. He's too busy playing the good husband. Her face filled the wall, wide-eyed, clutching that broken puppet arm. It was raw, unfiltered, exactly what I wanted. We left the projector rigged, the video set to loop, and locked up. Back home, I called a few neighbors, casual, friendly. "Hey, they're showing some local art stuff at the center tonight," I said. "Sarah's project's in it. Might be fun." Word would spread. It always did in Maplewood. By evening, Sarah emerged from the bedroom, pale but composed, stirring soup on the stove again. Her phone buzzed, Mrs. Carter, asking if she'd be at the center. "What's this about?" she asked me, confused. "No idea," I lied, chopping an onion. "Maybe someone found more of your puppets." Her spoon clattered into the pot. "I'm not going," she said too fast. "I'm tired." "Suit yourself," I said, shrugging. But I knew she'd hear about it. And when she did, the last thread of her control would snap. That night, Ellie and I stayed home, watching TV with Ben like it was any Sunday. At 9:14, Sarah's phone lit up. Texts, calls, a flood of them. She grabbed it, scrolled, and went white. "Oh no," she whispered. Then louder, "No, no, no." She bolted upstairs, slamming the bedroom door. I followed slow, listening through the crack. She was on the phone, voice shaking. "Mike, it's playing. At the center. Everyone's there." He hung up on her. I could tell from the silence that followed. She didn't come out again that night. Monday morning, the fallout hit like a storm. Sarah didn't leave the bedroom, but I heard her pacing, muttering to herself. Ellie went to school, had to keep up appearances, but texted me updates. Asterisk, kids are talking about it. Someone posted pics online. Asterisk, the video had done its job. Neighbors had seen it, filmed it, shared it. Sarah's collapse, her own words, looping for anyone with a phone. I went to work, sat at my desk, and let the calls come in. Dave, asking if I'd seen it. My boss, awkward, saying his wife had been there. I played dumb, said I'd talked to Sarah. Kept my voice steady. When I got home, the house was a tomb. Ben was at a friend's, Ellie still at practice. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, her phone face down beside her. "They know," she said flat, not looking at me. "Everyone knows." "Knows what?" I asked, setting my briefcase down. It was time to drop the mask. Just enough. She turned to me, eyes wide, searching. "The puppets. The video. It was at the center last night. Me and Mike. Everything." Her voice broke. "Did you do this, Tom?" I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Why would I? You're the one with secrets, Sarah. Puppets, late nights, Mike sneaking around. You think I wouldn't notice?" She flinched, hands twisting in her lap. "I didn't mean, it wasn't supposed to." "Supposed to what?" Cut in cold. "Hurt? Humiliate me? You made me a joke. Strung me up in your little show. And now it's out there, your art, your story. How's it feel?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. But I didn't stop. "You thought you could play me, keep me in the dark. But I saw it all, your scripts, your stage, your lies. And I made sure everyone else did too." She stood, chair scraping, voice ragged. "You ruined me. My friends, the kids, Ellie, Ben, they'll hate me." "They should," I said, stepping closer. "You did this, Sarah. You built it, and I just pulled the curtain back." She sank back down, sobbing, hands over her face. I walked away, left her there. The house felt colder, emptier, but I didn't care. She'd broken us, now she'd live with the pieces. The next week was a slow bleed. Sarah barely left the bedroom, emerging only to eat or stare out the window. The kids knew. Ellie had told Ben, gentle but firm, and he'd taken it hard, retreating to his room with his comics. Neighbors stopped calling, their curiosity replaced by awkward silence. Mike's truck hadn't been seen in days. Word was he'd taken a job out of state, running from the wreckage. Sarah's world had shrunk to the four walls of our house, and even that wasn't safe anymore. I kept the pressure on, subtle but relentless. I'd hum that tune she'd used in her puppet shows. watch her freeze mid-step. I left the garage door open, let her find the last puppet, hers. Hanging from the doorknob one morning, strings cut. She didn't scream, didn't fight, just took it and shut herself away again. Ellie helped, her anger a quiet fire. She'd play the video's audio through her earbuds, loud enough for Sarah to hear the echo, then act like it was nothing. We didn't need to say much. The damage was done. Friday, I came home to find Sarah packing a suitcase. Clothes, toiletries, her old sketchbooks. She looked up, eyes dull. "I'm going to my sister's," she said, no fight left. "I can't stay here." I nodded, didn't argue. "Take what you need." She paused, bag half-zipped. "I'm sorry, Tom. I never wanted." "Don't," I said, sharp. "You don't get to say that now." She left an hour later, headlights fading down the street. The house was mine again, ours, me and the kids. Ellie came downstairs, stood beside me at the window. "Is it over?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "It's over." But it wasn't, not really. Sarah's gone, but the scars stay, hers, mine, the kids. I tore her world apart, turned her own creation against her, and it felt right. Cruel, yes, but right. She'd live with it. Alone, exposed, every string she'd pulled severed. And me? I'd rebuild one day at a time with the truth laid bare. The puppets were gone. The stage was dust. All that was left was us, standing in the ruins she'd made.